The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty depot, and Margaret Hayes pressed her gloved hand against her ribs, where the bruises still throbbed from her stepfather's final beating 3 weeks ago. She descended carefully, each movement calculated to avoid the sharp pain that reminded her why she had answered an advertisement from a stranger in Enid, Oklahoma, promising marriage to a cattle rancher who needed a wife. Anything would be better than the Philadelphia boarding house, where her mother's new husband had made her life a nightmare of violence disguised as discipline. The year was 1884, and Margaret was 22 years old, educated enough to read and write beautifully, but poor enough that her options had narrowed to this single desperate choice. The platform bustled with activity as freight handlers unloaded crates and barrels. Margaret stood with her single carpetbag, searching the crowd for the man whose letters had been polite and businesslike, describing his ranch and his need for a practical woman who could cook and manage a household. Vincent Thorn had written that he was 30 years old, owned 2,000 acres of grazing land, and preferred honesty to poetry. She had appreciated that directness. Her last letter had arrived at the boarding house 2 days before she left, confirming her arrival date and assuring her that he would meet her personally. A tall man separated himself from the crowd near the depot building. He wore worn leather chaps over denim trousers, a blue cotton shirt that had seen many washings, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. As he approached, Margaret could see the sharp angles of his jaw, the sun-weathered skin that spoke of long days outdoors, and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He stopped 3 feet away and removed his hat, revealing dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. "Miss Hayes." His voice was deep and measured, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone who had spent time in Texas before settling in Oklahoma territory. "Yes, Mr. Thorn, Vincent. Just Vincent, if you do not mind." He gestured toward her bag. "May I carry that for you?" "My wagon is just down the street. I thought we might stop at the hotel restaurant for supper before heading out to the ranch. It is a 2-hour drive, and the road gets rough after dark." Margaret hesitated, then nodded. She had not eaten since dawn, and her stomach had been churning with nervousness. "That would be welcome, thank you." He picked up her bag as though it weighed nothing and started walking. Margaret followed, studying him from behind. He was broad through the shoulders, moved with an easy confidence that suggested strength, and kept glancing back as if to make sure she was still there. When they reached a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses, he set her bag in the back with care, then turned to offer his hand to help her up to the seat. Margaret flinched before she could stop herself. It was an instinctive reaction, a legacy of too many hands raised in anger. Vincent's hand froze in midair, and she watched his expression shift from polite helpfulness to something more serious. He slowly lowered his hand and stepped back. "I will not hurt you," he said quietly. "Not ever. But you do not have to take my word for it yet. The step is there on the side if you want to climb up yourself." Heat flooded Margaret's cheeks. She had revealed too much, too soon. "I apologize. I am tired from the journey." "No apology needed." He waited until she had settled herself on the wagon seat before walking around to climb up from the other side, keeping distance between them. When he took up the reins, his hands were steady and gentle on the leather straps. "The hotel is just up Main Street. They serve a decent beefsteak, and the cook makes bread fresh every day." They rode in silence through the dusty streets of Enid. The town was young, barely 3 years old, built up around the land rush that had opened Oklahoma territory to settlement. Buildings stood in various stages of completion, from rough lumber frames to proper storefronts with glass windows and painted signs. People crowded the boardwalks, and the sound of hammering echoed from construction sites. Margaret watched it all, trying to absorb this new world that would become her home. The hotel restaurant was clean and half full of diners. Vincent chose a table near the window and pulled out a chair for Margaret without trying to touch her. When the waitress came, he ordered for both of them after asking if Margaret had any preferences. The meal arrived quickly, and Margaret discovered she was hungrier than she had realized. The steak was tender, the bread still warm, and the coffee strong enough to chase away the last of her travel fatigue. Vincent ate slowly, occasionally glancing at her but not pressing conversation. Finally, as Margaret finished her second cup of coffee, he cleared his throat. "I want to be plain with you about expectations," he said. "My ranch is profitable but not fancy. The house has 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, a sitting room, and a front porch. I have 2 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse and a woman named Mrs. Patterson who comes twice a week to help with heavy cleaning and laundry. I am gone during the day checking fences, moving cattle, and handling the work of the ranch. I need someone to manage the household, prepare meals, and eventually, if we suit each other well enough, be a true wife in all ways." Margaret set down her coffee cup carefully. "And if we do not suit each other, then I will arrange for you to have safe passage anywhere you want to go with enough money to get yourself settled." He met her eyes directly. "I will not force anything, Margaret. May I call you Margaret?" "Yes." She drew a breath. Decided honesty was the only fair response to his forthrightness. "I should tell you that I have no experience with men. My stepfather discouraged any courtship, and I spent most of my time keeping house for my mother until she passed last year. I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you." Margaret folded her napkin, creasing it precisely. "I also should tell you that my stepfather was not a kind man. He believed in harsh discipline. I have some healing yet to do, physically and otherwise." Vincent's jaw tightened, and something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Did he hurt you badly? Badly enough that I was willing to travel 1,000 miles to marry a stranger?" Margaret lifted her chin. "But I am strong. I will fulfill my duties as your wife. I simply need time to adjust. Time you will have." Vincent signaled the waitress for the bill. "And those duties can wait until you are ready and willing. I have managed this long without a wife in my bed. I can manage longer until you want to be there." The frank statement should have shocked her, but instead Margaret felt relief wash through her body. She had feared that Vincent would demand his marital rights immediately, that she would have to endure another man's hands on her body before the bruises had even faded. This reprieve was more than she had hoped for. They left the restaurant as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The ride out of town took them west on a dirt road that cut through rolling grassland dotted with clusters of cattle. Vincent pointed out landmarks as they went, naming the neighboring ranches and explaining the lay of the land. Margaret listened, filing away information, watching how his hands controlled the horses with firm gentleness. The ranch house appeared as they crested a low rise. It was larger than Margaret had expected, built of sturdy lumber with a stone foundation and a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Outbuildings clustered nearby, including a barn, a bunkhouse, and several sheds. Fenced pastures extended in multiple directions, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance. "It is more than I imagined," Margaret said honestly. "My father started this ranch 15 years ago, before Oklahoma was officially opened for settlement. He had an arrangement with the Cherokee Nation that allowed him to lease grazing land. When he died 4 years ago, I inherited it and bought out the claim properly during the land rush." Vincent guided the horses up to the house. "It has been my life's work to build it up." He helped her down from the wagon with the same careful distance he had maintained all evening, then carried her bag up the porch steps and opened the front door. The interior smelled of wood smoke and leather. The sitting room was furnished simply with a sofa, 2 chairs, and a stone fireplace. Doorways led to other rooms and a staircase climbed to the 2nd floor. "Your room is upstairs, first door on the right," Vincent said, setting her bag at the foot of the stairs. "My room is at the end of the hall. The 3rd bedroom is for guests or, someday, children. The necessary is out back, but I installed a water pump in the kitchen last year, so you do not have to haul water from the well for cooking and washing." Margaret climbed the stairs and found her room clean and ready, with a bed covered in a quilt, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the eastern pastures. Someone had placed wildflowers in a jar on the dresser. She touched the petals gently, surprised by the thoughtfulness. When she came back downstairs, Vincent was lighting lamps against the gathering darkness. "I thought you might want to rest tonight," he said. "I can show you the kitchen and pantry in the morning and introduce you to the ranch hands. If you need anything during the night, do not hesitate to knock on my door." "Thank you, Vincent." He paused, studying her face in the lamplight. "I meant what I said earlier. I will not hurt you. Whatever that man did to you, whatever you are carrying, you are safe here. I need you to believe that, even if it takes time." Margaret felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "I want to believe it. Then that is a start." He handed her a lamp. "Sleep well, Margaret." She climbed the stairs again, aware of his gaze following her. In her room, she changed into her nightgown and examined her ribs in the small mirror above the washstand. The bruises had faded from purple to greenish yellow, but they still hurt when she breathed too deeply. Her stepfather had kicked her when she had tried to stop him from striking her mother's portrait, claiming it took up too much space in the parlor. That had been the final straw, the moment she had known she had to leave or risk worse. Margaret crawled into bed, surprised by the softness of the mattress and the clean smell of the linens. She had expected to lie awake worrying about her new situation, but exhaustion claimed her quickly, and she slept more deeply than she had in months. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs. Margaret dressed quickly in a simple calico work dress and made her way to the kitchen. Vincent stood at the stove, frying eggs in a cast-iron skillet. He had already set the table for 2. "Good morning," he said. "I hope you do not mind that I started breakfast. I am used to cooking for myself, but I will gladly turn the duty over to you if you want it." "I am happy to cook." Margaret tied on the apron hanging from a hook near the door. "What time do you usually eat?" "Dawn, mostly. I need to get out to check on the herd early, especially this time of year. Calving season is almost done, but I still have a few late mothers to watch." He slid the eggs onto plates and brought them to the table. "But there is no rush this morning. I wanted to be here to show you around properly." They ate together, and Vincent explained the routines of the ranch. After breakfast, he took her through the house room by room, showing her where supplies were kept, how the pump worked, and where he stored tools and equipment. The kitchen was well stocked with staples, and the pantry held preserved vegetables and fruits from last year's harvest. "Mrs. Patterson put those up," Vincent explained. "She has been helping me keep the place from falling apart since my father died. Good woman, practical. You will like her." Outside, he introduced her to the 2 ranch hands, a younger man named Sam who could not have been more than 20, and an older cowboy called Dutch who had worked for Vincent's father. Both men tipped their hats politely and welcomed her with genuine warmth. Margaret could see curiosity in their eyes, but also respect. Over the following days, Margaret settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She rose early to prepare breakfast, packed lunches for Vincent and the hands, spent her days cleaning, mending, and preparing supper. Vincent came in each evening covered in dust and sweat, but he always washed up at the pump before entering the house, and he always thanked her for the meal she had prepared. He never touched her unless absolutely necessary, and even then he telegraphed his movements, giving her time to adjust. When he needed to pass behind her in the narrow kitchen, he announced himself. When they sat together on the porch in the evenings, he kept a respectful distance. Margaret found herself relaxing incrementally, the constant tension she had carried for years beginning to ease. 2 weeks after her arrival, a spring storm rolled in with dramatic speed. Margaret was hanging laundry when the sky darkened and thunder rumbled. She hurried to gather the clothes, but the wind picked up, whipping the fabric from her hands. Rain began to fall in heavy drops, and within seconds she was drenched. Strong hands took the laundry basket from her. Vincent had appeared from the barn, his hat pulled low against the rain. "Get inside," he shouted over the wind. "I will bring this." Margaret ran for the porch, but her foot caught on the bottom step and she fell forward hard. Pain exploded through her ribs, the old injury flaring back to life. She gasped, unable to draw breath, curled on the wet porch boards. Vincent was beside her in an instant, dropping the basket. "Margaret, where are you hurt?" She could not answer, could only clutch her side and try to breathe through the pain. She felt him lift her, expecting roughness, bracing for more hurt. But his arms were careful, cradling her against his chest as he carried her inside. He laid her on the sofa with such gentleness that she barely felt the cushions beneath her. "Tell me where it hurts," he said, kneeling beside the sofa. His voice was urgent but calm. "Ribs," she managed. "Old injury, I fell on it. May I check? I need to see if anything is broken." Margaret nodded, and Vincent carefully unbuttoned the top of her dress, his fingers steady and impersonal. When he peeled back the fabric, she heard his sharp intake of breath. The bruises had faded significantly, but the fall had caused new swelling, and the entire left side of her ribcage was tender. "These are not new," Vincent said quietly. "This is from before you came here." "My stepfather," Margaret whispered. "The day before I left." Vincent's hands stilled. Then, with infinite care, he rebuttoned her dress and pulled a blanket over her. "I am going to ride to town and bring back the doctor. You need to be examined properly. I will be as quick as I can." "You do not have to." "Yes, I do." His eyes were fierce. "You are my responsibility now, Margaret. That means I take care of you properly. No arguments." He was gone before she could protest further. Margaret lay on the sofa, listening to the storm rage outside, and felt tears slide down her temples. No one had ever looked at her injuries with such anger on her behalf. No one had ever treated her broken body with such reverence. Vincent returned 3 hours later with Dr. Garrison, a gray-haired man with kind eyes and capable hands. He examined Margaret thoroughly, asking questions about the original injury and how it had happened. She answered honestly, too tired and hurting to prevaricate. When he finished, he sat back and looked at Vincent. 2 ribs were cracked initially, but have healed reasonably well. The fall today has caused deep bruising but no new breaks. She needs rest, hot compresses, and limited movement for at least a week. I will leave laudanum for the pain if it gets too bad at night. He turned to Margaret. "You are lucky, young lady. Another kick like that one, and you might have punctured a lung." After the doctor left, Vincent helped Margaret upstairs to her room. He brought hot water bottles wrapped in towels and placed them gently against her side. He propped pillows behind her back so she could breathe more easily. Then he pulled a chair up beside the bed and sat down. "I need you to tell me the truth," he said. "How bad was it? How often did he hurt you?" Margaret closed her eyes. "Often enough. He married my mother for her small inheritance, spent it within a year, and then resented having to support us. My mother died of pneumonia last winter, and after that, there was no one to check his temper. I tried to stay out of his way, but some days nothing I did was right. Why did you not go to the authorities and tell them what? He never marked my face. He was careful about that. And I had no money, no family, nowhere to go. She opened her eyes and looked at Vincent. Your advertisement was the first hope I had seen in a year. Even if you had turned out to be cruel, at least it would have been a different cruelty. Vincent's hands clenched on his knees. I am not a violent man by nature, Margaret, but if that man ever comes near you again, I will not be responsible for my actions. He will not. He was glad to be rid of me, one less mouth to feed. Then he was a fool. Vincent stood and moved toward the door. I will bring your supper up on a tray. You are not to get out of bed unless you absolutely must, understand. I can manage downstairs for a few days. He was true to his word. For the next week, Vincent took over all the household duties. He cooked simple meals, brought her breakfast, lunch, and supper on trays, and checked on her regularly. In the evenings, he sat in the chair beside her bed and read aloud from a collection of adventure novels he had inherited from his father. His voice was soothing, and Margaret found herself looking forward to those quiet hours. On the 8th day, she felt well enough to come downstairs. Vincent fussed over her like a mother hen, making her sit in the most comfortable chair and insisting she do nothing more strenuous than mending. Margaret complied, amused by his concern and touched by his care. That night, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge, Margaret spoke into the comfortable silence. Thank you, Vincent, for everything. For taking care of me, for getting the doctor, for not demanding explanations or making me feel ashamed. You have nothing to be ashamed of, Vincent said firmly. The shame belongs to the man who hurt you and to every person who knew and did nothing. He paused, then added, I want you to know something, Margaret. When I advertised for a mail-order bride, I was looking for a partner, not a servant or a punching bag. I have seen enough cruelty in this world. I do not want it in my home. What do you want? Margaret asked softly. Vincent was quiet for a long moment. Companionship, respect, someone to share the work and the rewards of this life, and eventually, if we are both willing, affection, maybe even love, though I know that cannot be forced. I have never been in love, Margaret admitted. I do not know if I would recognize it. Then we will learn together. Vincent stood and offered his hand. Come on, it is getting cold and you need your rest. Margaret looked at his outstretched hand, calloused from hard work, steady and sure. She placed her hand in his and let him help her to her feet. His grip was warm and firm but not tight, and when she was standing, he released her immediately. They walked inside together, and Margaret realized that for the first time in years she felt safe. The weeks turned into months. Summer came to Oklahoma territory with blazing heat and endless blue skies. Margaret's ribs healed completely, and she threw herself into the work of managing the household. She expanded the vegetable garden, learned to churn butter, and experimented with recipes that made Vincent and the ranch hands groan with pleasure at supper time. Mrs. Patterson became a friend, teaching her the tricks of preserving food and managing the harder aspects of frontier housekeeping. Vincent worked from dawn until dusk, but he always made time to sit with Margaret in the evenings. They talked about everything, their conversations ranging from practical discussions about the ranch to philosophical debates about books they had read. Margaret discovered that Vincent had a sharp mind and a dry sense of humor that made her laugh. He discovered that Margaret had a gift for storytelling and loved to hear her recount tales from her childhood in Philadelphia. Slowly, gradually, Margaret found herself drawn to him in ways that had nothing to do with gratitude or obligation. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. She appreciated the strength in his arms when he lifted heavy supplies. She felt a flutter in her stomach when he complimented her cooking or thanked her for mending his shirts. She started to understand what people meant when they spoke of attraction, of wanting. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch watching heat lightning flicker on the horizon, Vincent reached over and took her hand. Margaret's first instinct was to pull away, but she forced herself to remain still. His thumb stroked gently across her knuckles and she felt warmth spread up her arm. "Is this all right?" Vincent asked quietly. "Yes," Margaret whispered, and it was. His touch did not hurt, it did not demand or take, it simply offered connection, warmth, the possibility of something more. They sat like that until the stars came out, hands loosely clasped, and Margaret felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. This was what gentleness felt like. This was what safety allowed, the freedom to want instead of fear. The next morning, when Vincent came in for breakfast, Margaret greeted him with a smile that made him stop in his tracks. "Good morning," she said, and the warmth in her voice was new, deliberate. "Good morning," Vincent replied, his own smile widening. "You look happy." "I am," Margaret said simply. "I think I really am." August brought a crisis. A neighboring rancher named Sullivan, a hard-drinking bully who ran his land and his family with an iron fist, began pressuring Vincent to sell a section of grazing land that bordered both properties. Vincent refused politely at first, but Sullivan became increasingly aggressive, showing up at odd hours to argue and threaten. Margaret was alone at the house one afternoon when Sullivan rode up drunk and demanding to see Vincent. When she explained that Vincent was out checking the northern fences, Sullivan became belligerent, pushing past her into the house and insisting he would wait. "You need to leave," Margaret said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "Mr. Thorn will be back this evening. You can speak with him then." "I will speak with him now, and you will tell me where he is," Sullivan said, moving closer. He reeked of whiskey and sweat. "Or maybe I will have a conversation with you about convincing your husband to be reasonable." Margaret backed away, her mind racing. She knew that tone, that look in his eyes. She had seen it in her stepfather before he struck. "Get out of my house," she said, louder now. Sullivan laughed and reached for her arm. Margaret did not think, just reacted. She grabbed the cast iron skillet from the stove and swung it hard, catching Sullivan across the shoulder. He yelped and stumbled back, more surprised than hurt. "You crazy woman. I could have you arrested for assault. And I will tell the sheriff you forced your way into my home and threatened me," Margaret shot back, raising the skillet again. "Now get out before I aim for your head." Sullivan retreated, cursing, and slammed out of the house. Margaret stood in the kitchen, shaking, the skillet still gripped in both hands. When Vincent came home an hour later, she told him everything. His face went dark with anger. "That settles it," he said. "I am riding to town tomorrow to file a complaint with the sheriff. Sullivan has been a problem for every rancher in the area, but threatening women crosses a line." "Will that not make things worse?" Margaret asked. "Possibly, but you are more important than a piece of grazing land." Vincent cupped her face gently in his hands, the first time he had touched her face since she had arrived. "I will not let anyone hurt you, Margaret, not Sullivan, not anyone." Margaret leaned into his touch, overwhelmed by the fierce protectiveness in his voice. "I know," she whispered. "I trust you." Vincent's eyes searched hers, and then, slowly, he leaned down and kissed her forehead. It was chaste, tender, nothing more than a brush of lips against skin. But it made Margaret's heart race and her breath catch. "We will handle Sullivan," Vincent said. "Together." The sheriff took the complaint seriously and paid Sullivan a visit that resulted in a hefty fine and a stern warning. Sullivan kept his distance after that, though the enmity remained. Vincent hired Sam to stay closer to the house during the day when he was out on the range, just as a precaution. Margaret appreciated the protection, but more than that, she appreciated that Vincent had consulted her about the arrangement rather than simply imposing it. As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures and spectacular sunsets, Margaret realized she had fallen in love with her husband. It was not the dramatic passion of dime novels, but something deeper and more enduring, a love built on respect, trust, and genuine affection. She loved the way he listened when she spoke. She loved his patience with the animals and his fairness with the hired hands. She loved the way he had taken her broken, frightened self and given her the space to heal and grow strong. One evening in late September, as they prepared for bed, Margaret stopped outside Vincent's door instead of continuing to her own room. He looked at her questioningly, and she felt her cheeks flush. "I was wondering," she said quietly, "if you might want company tonight, not for anything more than sleeping beside each other. I just thought it might be nice not to be alone." Vincent's face softened with understanding. "I would like that very much, but only if you are certain." "There is no pressure, Margaret. I am certain." He opened the door wider, and Margaret stepped into his room for the first time. It was larger than hers, with a big bed covered in a thick quilt and a window that overlooked the barn and pastures. Vincent moved around the room, lighting a lamp on the dresser and turning down the bed. Margaret changed into her nightgown in her own room, then returned, feeling nervous and hopeful in equal measure. They lay down on opposite sides of the bed, a careful distance between them. The lamp cast soft shadows across the ceiling. Margaret could hear Vincent breathing, feel the warmth of his body nearby but not touching. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being patient with me, for never pushing." "You never have to thank me for treating you with basic decency," Vincent replied, "but you are welcome all the same." Margaret rolled onto her side, facing him. In the dim light, she could see his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the concern in his eyes. "I have been held before," she said quietly, "but never without pain. Every embrace I have ever known was either followed by violence or was the prelude to it. I do not know how to be close to someone without fear." Vincent turned to face her, mirroring her position. "Then we will learn that together too. May I hold you now, Margaret? Just hold you, nothing more." "Yes," she breathed. Vincent moved closer and carefully drew her into his arms. Margaret tensed instinctively, but he did not tighten his grip or force her closer. He simply held her, one arm beneath her head, the other resting lightly on her waist, giving her room to breathe and move if she needed to. His chest was warm and solid against her cheek, and she could hear the steady thump of his heartbeat. Slowly, Margaret relaxed. No pain came. No rough handling, no bruising grip, no expectation of anything beyond this moment. Vincent's hands remained still and gentle, his breathing even. He pressed a soft kiss to the top of her head, and Margaret felt tears sting her eyes. "This is what it should be like," Vincent murmured. "Comfort, safety, warmth. I will hold you like this every night if you want me to, and I will never, ever hurt you." Margaret believed him. She wrapped her arm around his waist and held on, letting herself be held in return. And for the first time in her life, she understood what tenderness truly meant. They fell asleep like that, tangled together, and when Margaret woke in the night, Vincent's arms were still around her, protective and gentle. It became their routine. Every night, Margaret would slip into Vincent's room and they would lie down together. Vincent held her close, sometimes talking quietly about the day, sometimes simply stroking her hair or her back in soothing circles. He never demanded more than she offered, never let his hands wander beyond what she had consented to. Gradually, Margaret's fear faded, replaced by a desire for closeness, for intimacy, for the expression of the love that had grown between them. One October night, as golden leaves drifted past the window and a cool breeze whispered through the curtains, Margaret tilted her face up and kissed Vincent on the lips. It was tentative, exploratory, but full of intention. Vincent responded carefully, cupping her face and deepening the kiss only when she pressed closer. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent searched her eyes. "Are you sure? We can wait as long as you need." "I am sure," Margaret said firmly. "I want this, Vincent, I want you. I want to be your wife in every way." What followed was tender and slow, Vincent checking in with every touch, every caress, making sure she was comfortable and willing. Margaret had expected awkwardness or fear, but instead she found connection and pleasure, the joy of being joined with someone who cherished her. Vincent held her gently through it all, whispering words of love and encouragement, and when it was over, he held her close and kissed her forehead with such reverence that Margaret felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I love you," she whispered. "I did not think I could ever love anyone, but I love you so much it scares me." "I love you too," Vincent replied, his voice rough with emotion. "You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, Margaret. I thank God every day that you answered my advertisement." They held each other through the night, and Margaret marveled at how far she had come. 6 months ago, she had been a broken, frightened woman fleeing violence. Now she was a wife, beloved and cherished, building a life with a man who treated her like something precious. Winter came gently to Oklahoma Territory that year, with light snows and cold nights that made the fireplace and warm quilts especially welcome. Margaret and Vincent settled into the deep contentment of a marriage built on mutual respect and growing love. They worked side by side on the ranch, planned improvements for the spring, and talked about the future they wanted to build together. In January, Margaret realized she was pregnant. She told Vincent over breakfast one morning, and his whoop of joy brought Sam and Dutch running from the bunkhouse, thinking something was wrong. When Vincent explained, both men grinned and offered congratulations. Mrs. Patterson, upon hearing the news, immediately began knitting baby clothes and offering advice on everything from morning sickness to proper nutrition. Vincent became even more protective, insisting that Margaret rest more and take on only light tasks. Margaret tolerated his fussing because she knew it came from love, but she also made it clear that she was pregnant, not fragile. They compromised, with Margaret agreeing to daily naps and Vincent agreeing to let her continue cooking and managing the household. Spring arrived with wildflowers and new calves. Margaret's belly swelled with their growing child, and Vincent spent his evenings with his hand on her stomach, feeling the baby kick and move. He talked to the baby constantly, telling it about the ranch and the animals and how much it was already loved. "You want a boy or a girl?" Margaret asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Healthy," Vincent said immediately. "That is all I want. A healthy baby and a healthy wife." "But if you could choose," Vincent considered. "A boy, I suppose, someone to help run the ranch someday, but a girl would be wonderful too. I could teach her to ride and rope as well as any man." Margaret laughed. "You would be the sort of father who spoils his daughter terribly." "Absolutely," Vincent agreed without shame. "She would have me wrapped around her little finger from day one." In late August, 2 days after Margaret's 23rd birthday, her labor began. Mrs. Patterson and Dr. Garrison were summoned, and Vincent paced the downstairs like a caged animal while the doctor attended to Margaret upstairs. The labor was long but not overly difficult, and as dawn broke on the second day, Margaret gave birth to a healthy baby boy with dark hair and a powerful set of lungs. Vincent was allowed in to meet his son, and the expression on his face when he took the baby carefully in his large, calloused hands made Margaret's heart overflow. He looked at the tiny infant with such awe and tenderness, and when he bent to kiss Margaret's forehead, his eyes were wet with tears. "You are amazing," he whispered. "Look what you have done. Look at him, Margaret, he is perfect." "What should we name him?" Margaret asked, exhausted but happy. "I was thinking Marcus," Vincent said. "After my father, Marcus William Thorn. What do you think?" "I think it is perfect," Margaret agreed. Marcus proved to be a content baby, nursing well and sleeping in reasonable stretches. Vincent doted on him, taking every opportunity to hold his son and refusing to be parted from him for long. Margaret watched them together and felt a profound sense of peace. This was her family. This was her home. The scared, hurting woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Enid nearly 18 months ago seemed like a different person entirely. As Marcus grew from infant to chubby toddler, the ranch prospered. Vincent expanded the herd and bought additional grazing land. Sam married a girl from town and built a small house on the property. Dutch trained a new young ranch hand and began talking about eventual retirement, though everyone knew he would work until he could not climb into a saddle anymore. Mrs. Patterson helped with Marcus when Margaret needed an extra pair of hands, and the baby charmed everyone who met him. Margaret and Vincent's love deepened with time and shared experiences. They learned each other's rhythms and needs, developed private jokes and comfortable silences. Vincent continued to hold Margaret gently every night, and she never tired of falling asleep in his arms, safe and cherished. The old nightmares faded, replaced by dreams of the future they were building together. When Marcus was 2 years old, Margaret became pregnant again. This time she hoped for a girl, and Vincent admitted he would not mind having a daughter. The pregnancy was easier than the first, and in the spring of 1888, Margaret gave birth to a healthy baby girl with her mother's auburn hair and her father's gray eyes. They named her Lily Rose Thorn, and Vincent's prediction proved accurate. He was utterly besotted with his daughter, carrying her everywhere and talking to her constantly. Marcus adored his baby sister, bringing her his favorite toys and patting her head gently. Margaret watched her family grow and flourish, and sometimes she could hardly believe this was her life. She thought occasionally about her stepfather, wondering if he had drunk himself to death yet, but those thoughts held no power over her anymore. He was a ghost from a painful past, and she had no room in her present for ghosts. On a warm June evening when Marcus was 4 and Lily was 2, the family sat on the porch together. Marcus played with a wooden horse Vincent had carved for him. Lily sat in her father's lap, babbling happily. Margaret sat in her favorite chair, mending a shirt and watching her husband and children with deep contentment. "Do you ever regret it?" Vincent asked suddenly, looking over at her. "Answering that advertisement, coming all this way to marry a stranger." Margaret set down her mending and smiled at him, at the man who had taught her what love truly meant, who had held her gently when no one else had, who had given her a life beyond anything she had imagined possible. "Not for a single moment," she said. "You saved me, Vincent. You gave me a home and a family and a future. You taught me that I could be loved without being hurt. I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." Vincent shifted Lily carefully to one arm and reached out his free hand. Margaret took it, and he pulled her close enough to kiss her softly. Marcus made exaggerated gagging sounds, and they both laughed. "I am the one who was saved," Vincent said quietly. "This ranch was just land and cattle before you came. You made it a home. You made me a family. I did not know I was lonely until you showed me what it meant to not be alone." They sat together as the sun set, painting the Oklahoma sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. 2 children, healthy and happy, 2 adults in love and committed to building a life together. A ranch that provided for them all. It was not the life Margaret had been born to, but it was the life she had chosen, and it was more than enough. In the years that followed, the Thorn family continued to grow and thrive. Marcus grew into a serious boy who loved the ranch and the animals, following his father everywhere and learning the work of cattle ranching from the time he could walk. Lily was a wild, joyful child who rode her pony fearlessly and refused to be left out of anything her brother did. Margaret gave birth to 2 more children, another boy they named James and a second daughter called Sarah, spacing the babies out so she could give each one proper attention. Vincent expanded the ranch to 3,000 acres and became known throughout the territory as a fair employer and skilled rancher. He served on the local school board and helped organize a church in Enid, though his faith was more practical than pious. Sam became Vincent's foreman, managing the day-to-day operations when Vincent needed to travel or handle business matters. Dutch did eventually retire, but stayed in a small cabin on the property, perfectly content to whittle in the sun and tell stories to the Thorn children. Margaret became a pillar of the community, known for her generosity and her organizational skills. She helped establish a women's auxiliary that raised money for the school and provided assistance to struggling families. She taught other women the skills Mrs. Patterson had taught her, paying forward the kindness she had received. But her favorite role was always as wife and mother, creating a home filled with love and laughter. As Oklahoma transitioned from territory to statehood in 1907, the Thorns celebrated with their community. By then, Marcus was 22 and managing a significant portion of the ranch operations. He had married a sensible young woman named Catherine who fit seamlessly into the family. Lily, at 20, had just announced her engagement to a neighboring rancher's son. James was 16 and considering studying animal husbandry at the agricultural college. Sarah, the baby at 14, was still deciding what she wanted from life, but showed signs of her mother's organizational brilliance. Vincent and Margaret, now in their early 50s, sat on the same porch where they had courted and raised their children, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Marcus and Catherine had 2 sons, rough and tumble boys who kept everyone on their toes. The ranch had passed into the capable hands of the next generation, though Vincent still rode out most days to check fences and enjoy the land he loved. 23 years, Margaret said, taking Vincent's hand as naturally as breathing. Can you believe it has been 23 years since I arrived in Enid? Best 23 years of my life, Vincent replied, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing her knuckles. The gesture was familiar, comforting, full of history. You know, I almost did not place that advertisement. I thought no woman would want to marry a stranger and move to the middle of nowhere. I am glad you did, Margaret said. I am glad you took that chance. I am glad I took that chance. Vincent pulled her closer, and Margaret settled against his shoulder, fitting perfectly into the space she had occupied for more than 2 decades. She thought about the frightened girl who had stepped off the stagecoach, bruised and desperate. She thought about the first time Vincent had held her, how gentle he had been, how patient. She thought about all the nights he had held her without pain, teaching her body and her heart that touch could be tender, that love could be safe. I love you, she murmured, the words as true now as they had been the first time she had spoken them. I love you too, Vincent replied, kissing the top of her head in the gesture that had become their signature expression of affection. Always have, always will. They sat together as the Oklahoma sun set over their land, over the life they had built together, over the family they had created. The mail-order bride and the cowboy, 2 broken people who had found each other and discovered that healing was possible when someone held you gently, loved you fiercely, and promised you safety. And every night, true to his word from the very beginning, Vincent Thorn held Margaret Hayes Thorn gently in his arms, and there was never any pain, only love, only warmth, only the deep contentment of coming home to someone who cherished every part of you. The ranch continued around them, cattle lowing in the distance, children and grandchildren filling the house with noise and life. But in their room, in their bed, in the private sanctuary of their marriage, it was always just the two of them, holding each other, loving each other, grateful for the choice they had made and the life they had built. The stars came out one by one over Oklahoma, and in the Thorn house, love resided in every corner, built on the foundation of gentleness and trust, proving that even the most broken hearts could heal when held with care. Margaret fell asleep in Vincent's arms as she had done thousands of times before, and knew without doubt that she was exactly where she belonged, held gently, loved completely, safe at last.